If you're going to do something, you must be passionate. It's got to come from your heart. It's got to be a love. You've got to almost eat, think, and drink that passion.
Today, I get the privilege of talking to John Walland, who's obviously a legend in the sports presenting and radio circles.
Madiba always used to mention unity and saying how important it is. That should always inspire you in your work.
We talked about tonality.
I can sometimes hear it in a person's voice. The passion is just not there. There's almost got to be a feeling of empathy.
The things that you could do to be a better presenter and just generally be a better person in life.
Be daring, be different, give it horns and make it happen.
Welcome to the Corner Office, where we bring you the latest news from the world of commercial real estate, the greatest voices in the industry, and the corporate chats you've been missing. Let's get to it.
We have John Walland in the studio today, which is quite exciting because it's usually the interviewer with experience who interviews the one with less experience or has a different subject. So it's a bit daunting for me today, but it's really exciting to have you here with us. So
Thank you
thanks
very
for
much
joining
indeed,
us,
John. And I must admit that you kind of are very modest, but it's always good to be humble, and everybody loves humility. But I must admit, in the briefing just beforehand, which was a very brief briefing, but you certainly come across as being very professional and knowledgeable, so I feel very comfortable.
Appreciate that. I see you've run a number of comrades.
Yeah.
You've run all over the place.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't even like to talk about all of those because there's nothing worse when you're interviewing somebody and they say, or you introduce him. Like the other day, it was my brother's 70th birthday. He's still living in Kabaga. And he said to me, John, and he's done a lot of stuff in his life. And he said, John, please don't start off by telling everybody how many I've done. It's not really about that, because do you know how you can tell very often when someone's achieved something, if they've achieved something?
Yeah,
They'll tell you.
They'll tell you. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were going to say?
No, it is amazing. I mean, I've actually got the numbers here.
Oh, that's okay.
So 10 comrades, 11 Two Oceans, 8 London marathons, 6 New York marathons, 2 Ironman triathlons. I mean, that in itself is really impressive.
Remember, in those days, I must be honest with you, that was the Leppen Ironman. So you might think it's the current Ironman. We used to canoe as opposed to swim.
What?
We used to canoe, and then we'd cycle, and then we'd run. So similar distances, but not quite up to the one today. You know,
Jeepers. Okay.
I must be honest with you. I have a great respect for the sea, and when I watch those Ironmen going into the sea to swim, albeit a short swim, I kind of think to myself, "Wow, rather you than me."
Incredible.
I'm not a good swimmer.
Swimming's my thing. I love swimming.
Do you?
But me, on the other hand, I look at the guys doing the run and doing the cycle, and that's just...
I think that's quite something.
Jesus, incredible.
It's incredible. Few take up the challenge, few meet it, I suppose, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
New York Marathon, for example, I had the honor, I guess. I was humbled in being able to guide blind runners during that tenure of running those 6 New York marathons. And that's quite a challenge in itself. It's interesting.
Jeepers.
And it was quite interesting because they kind of mismatched our times. Now, you can well imagine if you say to somebody, if you're doing a 2:51 marathon or so, which incidentally, and I say it modestly, was my PB in 1983 for a standard marathon. But if you suddenly said to somebody, now I'm going to get you to run with a 2:40 marathoner, it's a huge, big difference.
Oh, wow.
So the times
I get you. Yeah.
And it was almost a question of them leading me through the race and pulling me. So
how does it actually technically work? Is there sound that they're running to? Are you leading them? They know where you are, or how does that work?
You have a kind of a belt, John, so it's attached to you. It's a strap, and it's you have to, obviously, it's not that technical, but if you kind of, you make sure that you guide your blind runner and you go through it with a lot of ease. It's actually quite interesting because you talk along the way. Yeah. And of course, they are unable to experience what you're experiencing in terms of the 6 boroughs in New York that you would go through.
So you're describing it to them as you go.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Incredible.
So you go through challenging periods as well. You can just imagine. I mean, when you sometimes, the runner might hit the wall and you've got to give them a lot of inspiration and got to help them through.
Incredible.
And I would just describe a lot of things to them, but in such a way that they appreciated it because, of course, they couldn't see all the things that you could see on the side.
Listen, they got a world-class radio host talking to them the whole way through. I mean, it's unfair, actually. It's unfair.
To be quite honest with you.
It's unfair. My understanding is that in these marathons, especially if you're competing and all the rest of it, you're not allowed listening to music?
No. In fact, I think that's prohibited in a lot of events where you're not allowed to use
because it's performance enhancing, right?
Yeah. I guess to a degree.
So they're actually cheating. They've got this radio host and they're talking them through. It's, I don't know.
John, I'm sure you've run lots of races, but of course it is very inspiring when you go through when you go through a seconding table, for example, and they often have bands at those kind of things, at London Marathon and at New York, they've got a band there or a singer. And that's a big inspiration, but of course it's short-lived.
Yeah, and the crowds and the people and that's just
who
great.
would ever expect, and this is something a lot of people don't know, you speak about that, the crowds and that sort of thing. And I don't mean to digress from our topic and that sort of thing, but just to put that into perspective, for example, going down First Avenue in New York, more than 1 million supporters on First Avenue.
It's a number.
Not even an Olympic athlete inside a stadium would have as many supporters as that. So it's absolutely goosebump material as you go through First Avenue. The cheers, it's just.
I mean, our biggest stadiums are
goosebump material. Really.
Our biggest stadiums are carrying 80,000.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I think the was 67,000. Wasn't that the amount that was at the '95 Rugby World Cup thereabouts? And a lot of them now, of course, bigger Cape Town Stadium, the Olympic stadiums, that sort of thing. The ones we have here.
Yeah, and you get 1 million when you do your run. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, it's just incredible. It's sensational stuff.
Amazing. I'm going to jump back to PE again.
Yes.
You obviously started your career in pharmaceuticals and sales and that kind of thing.
Yes.
You could imagine obviously sales and having the ability to talk easily going into radio. These two things probably line up, so that's your link. So you're still involved in the medical field?
I've completed that contract now, so I'm moving on to other interests in the marketing and sales field.
Interesting.
More PR related. I quite like that. I believe that life is very much about relationships, building relationships. And I think that very often public relations is so underestimated. It's such a broad field. If you had to say, what is public relations? It encompasses so much, and it's such an important field of expertise in any organization.
Sure. We obviously work quite a lot in that space, right?
Yes,
so we are dealing in that public relations space, and it's exactly that. It's those relationships that you have and that you build over time, and they come to know that you have an expertise and that they are requiring certain information because they want to be tapped in. And if you're very close to your subject, whatever it might be, you are pretty tapped in, and they want to know that. So you build these relationships over time. And I find some people in that PR field are excellent interviewers, so just, very, very good. In fact, just after this, I'm talking to Jeremy Maggs. He's a fantastic interviewer. In fact, he's quite difficult to be interviewed by because he'll catch you out,
I'm with you,
so whereas sometimes you'll just go on and it's almost predetermined what you're going to talk about. You could almost say anything and they're like, oh yes, and moving on to my next question,
Yes.
Whereas if you're talking to Jeremy, for example, he say, I don't know if I agree with you on that,
Yeah.
And then you suddenly got to know your subject very, very well. So
Indeed.
If you were caught blustering, you're going to be deeply down there. Yeah.
I've always believed in good relationships with the sports stars that I've interviewed, administrators, a hell of a lot of people over the years. And I've always believed in keeping a very good relationship with those people, because you always need to pick up the phone again and speak to them, as opposed to going into controversial areas and that sort of thing. And so that's been sort of my focus in terms of finding out more about the person as opposed to going for controversial.
Just asking a question,
Although, very often you find things out about people, but it's private. It's not for public consumption.
Yeah, a bit of discernment is required,
100%. You've hit the nail right on the head, John.
So to segue from that sort of career in sales and pharma, now moving into radio, and obviously one of the roles you're very well known for, and I think where you built a lot of your career was 5FM, right?
Very much so.
Yeah.
A program they call National Sports Tracks, where we had the opportunity. In those days, it was a lot easier in terms of being able to pick up a phone, and you could literally phone a person right there and then.
Yeah.
Now it's a different protocol.
Really?
You have
because of the agents
very often, and you've got to be very careful in those particular arenas, insofar as you don't want to tramp on people's toes and that sort of thing. So it has become a lot more challenging. But I still believe with rapport and relationships, you can still be fast-tracked and get to those people that you want to speak to. For example, Steve Kitsoff now, who's just retired. I would imagine that
I saw that announcement.
Wants a little bit of his time and that sort of thing. A very likable guy. Yeah. And if you've got a relationship with him, then you could literally pick up the phone. But getting back to that, it was almost a question of, we heard a story, pick up the phone, let's speak to that person directly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we used to do.
There was probably a lot less fame perhaps in that time, so albeit very famous people given that it was radio really and TV, there was a lot less social media, or there was no social media. The kind of fame is at a different level now, and the professionalism of all of these industries is at a different level. So if you look at, and I would say the later part of the 90s was almost like a watershed moment where suddenly the professional sports guys started to make a hell of a lot of money.
Yes.
So look at Percy,
exactly.
for example.
Yes.
I think he was one of the first guys to really start making money.
100%.
Whereas before that, not really, decent.
Yeah.
And perhaps it helped you transition into a successful career afterwards.
Yes.
But there wasn't a lot in terms of like advertising spend and radio spend on these people and public appearance spend and that kind of thing, compared to the numbers that the guys are earning now.
Wow. I would imagine, and you're so correct. I mean, I know that some of those sportsmen and women from over 4 decades ago, they somehow feel that they lost out almost because they don't get any of the endorsements they didn't in those particular days. It was almost a love, wasn't it? So to don the green and gold, it wasn't about money. It was all about representing your country.
Yeah.
And I think some feel that they were let down, I guess, in some respects, but they were never the same kind of incentives that they are today.
Didn't exist.
And my personal feeling on it all, to be honest with you, John, is that pay the players as much as they possibly can earn in the short time that they're giving us so much satisfaction, day in and day out.
And putting everything on the line.
Yes, and putting everything on the line. You mentioned Percy Montgomery. I remember Percy. He once wore a pair of rugby boots.
The white ones,
Yes, the white ones. And everybody laughed and they thought, and Percy almost set a precedent, I think, for that because thereafter people saw Percy wearing those boots. They laughed at the time, perhaps, because it was a new innovation. But then they went on to don the same kind of boots. And
You're 100% correct, actually. That was a bit of a watershed moment.
Dedicated followers of fashion.
Yeah. It was also interesting to, note that in what you're saying now, pay them as much as possible in the time that they are in the space, right?
Yes.
Because even in the space, there are guys making a hell of a lot of money. But 80% of the guys don't. Maybe 80%'s too much. Maybe let's say 60% and be fair. That they're actually not making the kind of real legacy type money that the top guys are making.
Yes.
And they're earning well. They're doing all right. And then there's some guys who are not even doing all right. And if you go down to sports like swimming, for example, you're not earning enough to, you're just not earning enough.
Yeah. And John, you take golf, for example. That's another sport that one doesn't realize how tough and difficult it is and how relatively few people make it.
Yeah.
And, you often hear people say, we've got to get into golf and that sort of thing. And you don't realize the challenges that a lot of those golfers have to face with the parents having to basically aid them, during a very challenging time.
And surfing, and there's so many of these things.
Yes,
yeah.
indeed.
I love these documentaries that have come out over the last 5 years, really. Yeah, all of these huge, sports documentaries have just been fantastic, to like really get into it and understand what was going on. It helped to sort of jump in, and I'd love to see more South African ones.
Yes.
You obviously had Chasing the Sun. That was fantastic. It gave you such insight. And I think that Rassi's done fantastic, and he's an absolutely hilarious public speaker and public.
Did you say Rassi or doctor?
Rassi, yeah, exactly, yeah.
I was often wondering, because it's funny you talk about all that, and I'm so with you on your page, but you just made me kind of think of Rassi with his innovative type character. He's an absolute genius
Completely.
As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But I was kind of surprised, when they said that there were no water boys allowed. Remember, they kind of got into that and they banned him from doing that. But I thought, now that he's a doctor, does that mean that he can actually work as a medical? As a medical assistant.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an absolutely hilarious character. And I think the likes of Chasing the Sun, for example, did a lot for the popularity of that team. And then they would have got momentum from that and, building this sort of personal brands, as it were, and so they would have all done very well out of that, But to going back to your point, to actually start interviewing these people and building a relationship. Yeah. What I'm interested in is the guys who're starting in radio, or starting in a career of being a presenter, or want to be a presenter and that kind of thing. What are your sort of, if you were to take 5 attributes that you think someone needs to have? I mean, do you need to be the biggest extrovert? Do you need to be a fantastic public speaker? Or are these things that you can work on, that you can actually develop as a skill going forward? Talking to you now and obviously having listened to you over the last 20 years, you have an ability to communicate it as it's a natural ability for you. You can see it. But I would imagine that even having a natural ability, you would have had things that you're trying to work on. I want to try and present better. I want to be more interesting in my interviews. I want to have better questions perhaps. What are the sort of 5 attributes and maybe the things that people could work on getting into this career? What should they be looking at?
I'm thinking almost in radio fine-tuning.
Yes.
Excuse the pun.
Yeah.
But I think you make me think of a lot of things, and I'm going to start off, and I'll go through those 5 points.
Make them 10 if you have. Yeah.
Which hopefully can inspire people who would like to get involved in this particular aspect in broadcasting. But I want to take you back to some pilots that I managed to chat to, and one of them being my niece. And I'll never forget, she had pictures on her wall of aeroplanes from when she was 4 or 5.
Yeah.
She knew what she wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that sort of passion. I've seen people in the broadcasting industry who've basically pursued a particular aspect in order to get into something else, if you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
So for example, somebody might say to you, you can't get in as a DJ, but you can get in as a newsreader or as a sports presenter. There are ways and means of getting a foot in the door, and I fully appreciate one's got to look at all particular avenues. But
I suppose talk radio is slightly different from just, DJing kind of.
Yes. Yeah. John, what I meant in the perspective of using something that you're not interested in, because if you're going to do something, you must be passionate. And that is obviously the desire, the passion to do something has got to be there. It's got to come from your heart. It's got to be a love. You've got to almost eat, think, and drink that passion without affecting those around you, by still being able to interact with your family and trying to keep a balance, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So the one most important thing is the passion.
Yeah.
And I can sometimes hear it in a person's voice when they are doing a report. You can see they're not quite focused on, or the passion is just not there.
You can hear it immediately.
I can read something immediately, and I can quote it and give you that result. But there's almost got to be a feeling of empathy, of warmth. It's very important. So if I have a story, and yes, I may be reading it in my bulletin, but I think to myself, wow, that was amazing. And I happened to watch that match and those 3 tries that he scored in quick succession, as opposed to so-and-so scored 3 tries in succession. Bring in the warmth and the feeling, the personality behind it is so important. So we've only got to 1 point now. And so dedication, passion, fulfillment, needs, all those kind of things.
What about
aspects of what somebody would want, and just to go in and be sincere and
authenticity,
with authenticity, and be first, I suppose, be daring, be different, be yourself.
Being yourself is such a, we talk to the guys in our team. So we obviously in the real estate business, in a real estate sales and leasing business. And what we always say to the guys is just be authentic, be you. If you want to communicate like you, as long as you is okay, but we're assuming that you are okay. But if you just want to communicate authentically to someone else, because people will warm to that immediately, because they'll communicate authentically as themselves.
Yes.
And if you take it to a different level, then you try and be very, very professional and staccato and the way that you're talking and formal, and then people are going to respond to you formally, and then you're never going to build a rapport that you require. And I think you building a rapport with an invisible person in front of you almost, because when you're talking, yes, there are the people that are talking around you, like we're sitting here and we have everyone around you operating their cameras and all the rest of it, but you're actually talking to an invisible audience. Do you almost feel like you're trying to connect with the people out there when you're telling your story?
in radio, it's always been a question of you talking to one person.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's not an alter ego or something.
Yeah.
But I kind of think to myself when I'm broadcasting, I'm speaking to passionate sports fans, people who. But I don't think of one person in particular. I think of all the people who are out there who are listening.
Yeah.
Who I'm basically giving information to, but I want to feel almost that I am warm to them, and that and that I'll warm up to them, and that they are getting the information that they want.
Yes,
that's concise to the point, and also that it's making a difference, I think, in terms of just reading it out. So
that authenticity means that you're also and was it Bezos or one of these seriously successful businessmen?
Yes.
It is Bezos. Yeah, it's Amazon. Yes. One of their things is that the level of writing that you communicate, they do a lot of memos. So they write full memos motivating what they want to do or motivating what they want allocation of capital for.
Right.
They need to present those memos at I think it's a grade 8 level or grade 9 level or something along those lines. So it's not, professorial level or university level, even matric level, it's less than that.
Yes.
It's using very easy to understand language.
Right.
I would imagine that you could sit and speak to a very sophisticated person in very technical detail. Yes. But that's not going to really capture your audience, right? So are you trying to pitch what you're saying, and when you're communicating on radio at a certain level, is that something that you
very much so? And I think that it's almost like conversational, isn't it?
Yes.
Because it's like talking to you now. I mean, you don't need to use highfalutin words and things like that, So it's just being human and being yourself, and putting the message across in such a way that first of all that you understand it, and that your audience, your listener, can understand it in whatever terms it might be. Obviously, there's lots of sporting terminology and things like that. Yeah. Pronunciations, very, very important.
Yes.
Nowadays, of course, you can go to a pronunciation guide, which is a good thing. And I do that very, very often because I don't want somebody out there hearing a name and saying, well, gee, that's a mispronunciation. And, he doesn't know his sport, because that could lead to that.
Yes.
I remember, and one should never judge like that, but I suppose I've heard mispronounced stuff.
Yeah.
And, then you suddenly kind of think to yourself, that person doesn't really know
what they're talking
about. That's especially if it's a well-known person.
We also have
Goran Ivanisevic, I remember that, things that need to be practiced and pronounced properly.
Yes.
And never, ever just take the report and just read it. Think of your audience and know that
who you're talking to.
Who you're talking to.
Especially in South Africa, we have the context of a number of different official languages. I think we have 11.
11, exactly.
11,
Yes.
So we have 11 official languages, and of course that means that everyone in sport or in business or whatever it is could be one of these 11 official languages. I mean, I listened to I did love the Wackhead Simpson. Yes. Can you do this in Sutu, John?
Yes, can you imagine? I mean, really, I was, I'll never forget that. And before every bulletin, you must never have that overconfidence.
Yes.
You always have that degree of, I'm about to do a presentation. It's not a nervousness thing, but it's just a question of being on your toes and actually not just taking things for granted.
Yes.
Because that's when you really will slip up,
Could you say heightened?
Yeah, heightened's a good word.
Yeah. So, because I think that in that scenario,
analogy, rather,
I think in that word you want to be very present. You want to bring. I had the interesting experience of attending a Jordan Belfort sales training tonality course years ago with Jordan Belfort there, and of course he had developed his own style and all the rest of it. And one of the things that he said, he uses this thing anchoring. So he likes to really anchor and bring himself into the moment before he walks into the stage.
Okay.
So when he arrives on the stage, he is literally up. He's bringing the energy to the audience, and you've got to do that at a very extreme level, because you're talking to 1,000 people. They need your energy, and you need to cue them in. So you want them present. I could imagine what you're saying now is your way of anchoring into the moment.
Correct.
I think about playing sport, there's a little bit of nervousness before you start that game, As soon as you're in your flow, it just goes away. It's almost instant. You're in your game and now you are present, But before it doesn't matter who you're playing,
It's so true.
And so I think it's the same thing with appearing, because this is your you need to deliver
persona,
now.
it's everything. Yes. And you're going with a lot of action and excitement. You know, I'm privileged to be able to announce at events, and that's one of my favorites. My really great pastimes is being able to be behind a microphone and inspire an audience at a road race, for example, like the Comrades Marathon or the Knysna Forest Marathon, and to be with all the runners together, you know, huddled up and being part of the whole thing. And just getting that excitement, you know, it's very the energy, and I love, and energy is another thing that I suppose I could have put in those components that you asked. You must have energy. It's very, very important. You know?
What do you do when you're just feeling off?
You know, funnily enough, it's a good question, but I've never felt in a position where I felt depressed or anything like that. Yeah. Maybe running has been a good antidepressant for a lot of people who can honestly say I haven't taken any medications and things like that, because I try to. Not homeopathic, but I try to look at other alternative, methods of medicine if you need it. I've never had a headache or anything like that.
Jeepers, that's incredible.
I haven't felt off because with sport, for example, John, I wake up in the morning and if I'm going to speak, I think, wow, this is brilliant. This is a whole new day. It's lovely. And
that's an incredible attitude.
Also adopt that in your everyday life. If you've got here's your Galetti brochure, for example, real estate service for business rescue and liquidations. You know, this is a lovely tool. It's a detail aid, as I would put it, you know, and I would go into that with so much enthusiasm, and love and cherish every day, and try not to have off days. But I would be dishonest if I said I haven't had an off day for whatever reason. But I would never ever let that come across, because can you imagine being behind a microphone and something that the dog might have bitten you or something to that effect, or you might have had something untoward happen, and the emotions are not good. Somebody maybe in the traffic didn't treat you well, but you cannot ever let that come across to any human being, as far as I'm concerned. It's about what happened to you. It's got nothing sorted out yourself. And don't actually bring that across.
It's an incredible. It's an incredible ability, because, you know, you could feel, I mean, maybe you don't feel terrible, maybe you feel distracted, you know, you feel distracted and you're not
quite yourself.
Cued in. It makes it a little bit more difficult. You actually literally have to anchor yourself, raise your energy, arrive.
Absolutely, John. That's it. And just look above that issue, and then maybe afterwards deal with it. You know, if it has to when you're off air. But not because your phone might ring or so to say that the gate won't open. You know, during an ad break or something like that. You can't get out the gate, and then suddenly that's foremost on your mind. But that's got nothing to do with the listener. The listener needs to know that you're happy. And that you can go beyond those particular moments and deal with them effectively.
I remember a specific podcast. It was one of the earlier ones we had, and one of our guests, and he was the head analyst of Investec, and he was coming for a podcast, and it was going to be a fantastic podcast because it was moving into exactly the space that we wanted to be in. Really well educated and high powered position at Investec, which is an amazing brand. Was coming here to share his thoughts about the economy with us. I mean, fantastic. And I love that space. So I was very excited to do this interview at the same time. However, we'd had a team event the night before, and of course it celebrated a little bit too late. And
indulged, in other words.
I was feeling tired.
In a manner of speaking.
Yes. And I remember saying, I don't think I'm not ready for this. I'm not going to be on point. I'm not going to, and I was telling myself this. Kato heads our marketing here, says, you will go up the road, you will go and have something to eat, and you will come back here and you will have that interview and you're going to deliver.
Brilliant.
I went up the road, had something to eat, and I came back and I delivered. Because you're able to pull that together and get it together and say, right, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm not going to let this.
I love it. So there was a plan B, and at least you had an energy drink or anything like that.
Tell me some of the interviews you've had over the years. Obviously, you interviewed Nelson Mandela, for example.
Yes, that was a great experience.
You've interviewed Drickus, who recently won his fight against Sean Strickland, and just so many interesting people. Tell me, with these people, is there sort of like a common thread you can draw on to say, I mean, I can't get my head around some of the injuries that the guys sustain and then just carry on going? he's just broken his ankle, but he just played the rest of the game type of scenario, What is going on in there in a professional sportsman's mind? In your opinion, you've interviewed so many of them.
If you look at the type of people that I've been privileged to interview, everybody has a different story. It's not necessarily an injury that someone's come off an injury, and we'll talk about that. But it's just about the soul, the heart, the mind, the makeup of the person, that when you talk to them, you hopefully extrapolate and get out the information like in a conversational way without doing it in a roundabout way, is that they open up their hearts and they talk to you about whatever they want to share.
Of course, if they don't connect with you, they're not going to talk to you.
No. Yeah. And I'd always say to somebody at the end of an interview, for example, so let's say, for example, you had your questions in your mind. That's not always a good thing, as if this is your next question and
yes,
kind of thing. You just go, you let it flow. So I always say at the end of the day, is there something that I might have missed out in chatting to you? And you won't believe what comes out of that.
Really, yeah?
Because there's something that you didn't actually know and talk about that person would have spoken about.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are nervous when they talk to you, and they might give you simple, short answers.
Of course, because the person is a professional sportsman, doesn't he? He's a professional speaker.
I'll never forget Brendan Fenter, Dr. Brendan Fenter. Remember, he was a coach overseas, and somebody interviewed him after a game, and he just gave one-word answers. And it was just interesting to see the interviewer's face, because he couldn't believe that somebody would do this. I think he might have been wrapped over the knuckles, Brendan. But
well, of course, they have to do training now.
Yeah,
right?
They've got a lot of training,
public speaking.
I just hope that that's not based on what if somebody asked you that. How would you approach that? I always love just to be natural, and I think
authentic answers.
Authentic answers. Yeah, like we're talking here. You feel at home. You feel very comfortable.
Yeah,
there's nothing contrived.
Yeah,
and there's nothing that I also believe, and I'm actually going into my own podcast, as you probably know, John. But I'm thinking of, I was thinking of giving the questions to the person that I'm interviewing, so that at least they're comfortable with it, particularly if you're going to ask questions, for example, about their past and how they got to where they are, and maybe some of the stories that they don't share when you hear them after a game. That was a great game. I scored a brilliant try. The team did well. That's the kind of standard answers that you would see in an interview, but more to get behind the
what's there,
the emotional sides, and what's really what makes that person the person that they are. You would turn around and say, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it'll be a fantastic podcast. And I have a few questions for you on that. And you've had this long career in radio, and now I would say that, radio is still obviously where most of the money is globally.
Yes.
But podcasts are becoming really popular. You look at, Huberman and Joe Rogan and Stephen Bartlett, and they have a significant following on these podcasts, right? And what I'm interested in is, what do you feel is different, better or worse in podcasts than radio? And how do you compare the two? They are quite a different format. Obviously, one's long format, one's shorter format. But how do you feel about the two different formats?
Well, somebody said to me, can they coexist? Whilst they share similarities, John, I do believe that both being audio-based media, there's certainly a space. They serve different audience needs.
I agree.
Let's put it like that. Yeah. So I definitely think that there's a big future, and not only the needs, but also the consumption habits. I think at the end of the day. So I do believe that radio will continue to grow. There will always be a place for radio in this world, have been for centuries, I don't know, decades. I don't know when it first started out, but live versus on demand. Traditional radio is often live and scheduled.
I suppose technically it started with the town crier.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. There you go. That goes back a long. Yeah. It went out with the Rinderpest, I think. Yeah, so I think the two definitely have their places. And, for example, traffic news, all that kind of stuff that you would be wanting to hear in your car, that's still available to you as well. A lot more people listening to podcasts in their car now with all the different systems that have been developed.
Well, Gareth Cliff went onto Cliff Central. With,
yeah. And I admire Gareth. I think it was great for him because he was one of the first guys to actually go into that and realize that there was potential in that.
Very much so,
market. I think generally speaking, there's certainly great prospects for for podcasts. I don't believe one should go into a podcast with the view of making money.
Yeah.
I know that I don't even know the ins and outs of it, but I know that obviously if you get X amounts of viewers, YouTube would pay you.
Yes.
I don't think it's the kind of thing that you're going to make money overnight in. That's for sure.
Sure.
Whereas you might get a job at a radio station doing whatever you do and you'll get a salary and that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's a big difference.
Once you start getting the interest in that, obviously sponsors are going to follow you. But you probably, everything's about ROI, isn't it? So at the end of the day, you're going to turn around and say, what is my return on investment in this? And you'll probably get people who will sponsor your podcast for maybe a 3-month period and see how it goes.
I would imagine someone in your position who has great relationships. You've got a lot of great relationships out there. People will take your call. You've had fantastic conversations with them. You interview authentically. You have background. You have a lot of knowledge. I was laughing because when you started rattling off the different products that you used to sell in 1989 at Johnson & Johnson, it must be a skill. You could probably sit here and I'd say, tell me all the, super, like the
interactions and all that kind of
or
stuff.
tell me all the South African rugby players. Start naming them. You'd get to like 90 before you you could start slowing down.
And similarly with you, I mean, there's areas, and you must never ever take that away from anybody. It's not about me. It's about everybody who has different talents and different areas of expertise, and one must always respect and appreciate those particular areas. Fortunate in many ways that I can open doors and things like that. It does help in terms of but not something that you would leverage in terms of for your own good. At the end of the day,
I think someone put it the other day.
About the person. It's about you get people who say it's all about me.
Yes,
it's not really.
Someone put it the other day. In order to get people to follow you and all the rest of it, it's actually about giving your knowledge away to people, so they know that that's a place to go.
Thank you. Exactly. And a lot of people say it's picking your brains. Isn't it? You get that often where people would want something. You just need to pick your brain.
Yes.
I think some people charge for that. Almost,
exactly,
But it's just, you need to part with that knowledge.
Part with your knowledge, What are you aiming to focus your podcast on? What is your what is the thrust of your idea?
John, so what I've thought of is I'm going to be doing something, again, I did briefly mention it to you, but I'm so keen, and it comes from my heart again here, and a passion to want to do it, is to actually not have a results type directed podcast, but more one on what's your story. That's exactly what it is. If that sounds too direct to you, what's your story?
Yes.
So maybe we could start off, for example, if I were interviewing you, tell me a little bit about your life when you grew up and what inspired you to become what you are now, your advice to others, and not necessarily the sportsmen and women as individuals, but their partners, their husbands, their wives, to bring them in as well. Because so often it's the people that are behind the scenes who get so little recognition.
Yes.
And it's all about that particular person. And this is something that I've been exposed to a lot, and I would never go so far as to mention situations, but where somebody has got all the glory, but I know behind all that glory, there's been a lot of teamwork and a lot of other people that deserve the recognition.
Yes.
That never, ever get brought up. One person somehow seems to take the limelight in a lot of things. I mean, I look back to the moon landing, for example. I know who was that? Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin. I think that was. I mean, there's a situation where they were all three of them were there. One walked, I think. And, it's a long time. I listened to it on radio in the 60s, I think. If I were in a situation where there were team members, they need to be mentioned. They need players, people who helped you, people who bought you your first pair of shoes, or something like that. Or
what's the story behind the story?
Love it. And there's so much you can do and delve into that.
And so maybe you can answer that question for us. What is going on in the psychology of these guys that they play? I mean, I'll tell you one thing.
Yes.
If I break my finger, I'm not continuing to play. It's just, But these guys will just strap this thing up and play. It's insane.
I mean, I'm sure it's not. It's just incredible how you're right. I mean, certain things like that, the guys would never. They would come off the field. A head injury, a concussion injury, you are forced to take time off and stuff like that. But these guys are so keen, and somebody will ask them a question. Are you okay to play? His fingers like that.
Yeah.
Are you okay to play? And they will come back and say, yes, of course. We are available to play, and I can play. And they will just go on and defy all the odds sometimes.
It is truly inspiring. I look at guys like that and I think you
and then
really
don't forget
need to
there are
harden
things
up.
that can actually deaden the pain.
Yes, yeah.
So
I just say, I need to rest. I'm getting a bit of it's like, come on,
I think it's time out. Everybody does need that. You need a bit of downtime.
Yeah.
I think spiritually we are bush and sea. That's certainly where I am. The bush and sea. And I think there's a time for the sea and a time for the bush.
Bush, yeah.
And wow, we have a magnificent country.
Very different places.
When you were speaking about unity, it's something that certainly is something that resonates with me. I know that our late President Madiba always used to mention unity and saying how much important it is, in terms of in the bigger picture, not just in sport, but unity is certainly strength.
Yeah, I wish that was embodied more. I think that message is like goes.
Yes. I'm sure when you come off a rugby match, for example, and a World Cup final or whatever it might be, Six Nations, which I'm loving, that should always inspire you in your work, in what you're doing, in your job.
Yeah.
And you would have that same kind of attitude, that same sort of gees, that same sort of energy and embracing and bringing everybody together in a special way. I just wish that it would always carry through.
Yeah.
And rugby certainly has set a precedent.
It really has, yeah.
And I know you were chatting to me about the cricketers and that sort of thing, of course, in action against Australia today.
Yes.
It's always a bit of a nemesis for us, eh?
Yeah. And listen, some of our guys want to go to this ICC match at Lord's.
Yes.
I mean, it's going to be a fantastic experience.
It's going to be absolutely beautiful. The test, it's always a great experience. Lord's is a fantastic stamping ground. Have you ever been there?
Never, not personally, no. Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing.
Special.
Amazing. Very, very special.
Yeah. How do you think we're going to fare there?
I don't know. I think BMT is something that we certainly have learned to cope with, and it's always been
And why is that?
I don't know. It's interesting, but it's always seemed to kind of been associated with the cricketers in particular. But wow, they certainly have defied those BMT taggings, I guess you could call it that. They've come out guns blazing now, and it's something that hopefully we can put behind us. And that, we certainly have BMT in so many other sports, don't we? Yeah, we show our true muscle. And I think we're very unique as South Africans. Well, we are, and be able to overcome adversity. Like you said, playing with an injury, things like that. Not always advocated, but, guys will always go the extra mile and give it their 100%.
It's nice to see the cricketers in this space. Do you think it comes down to leadership? Do you think it comes down to coaching?
Leadership, I think it's multifactorial, quite frankly, John. I think they often say everything comes from the top, in businesses and stuff like that. And you've got that kind of dynamic within a company whereby that's the way you roll kind of thing that needs to filter down to each and every individual. They need to know exactly that they're on the same page as you and all striving for exactly the same goal, the same achievement. And I think that's very important. So I wouldn't single out one person in particular in terms of the whole team. It invariably comes from the top.
Interesting. And of course, we've got SA All Blacks game at Eden Park.
Yeah.
They haven't lost there. It's another fantastic, sporting event for us coming up.
Very much so.
So that's going to be an interesting one.
Are you a big rugby fan?
Listen, when it comes to if you were to
put us in South Africa,
if you were to put us in the ranking of where I am in the office,
yes,
it starts with Wesley, who's our MD of auction in Cape Town. He's the number. He is the massive rugby fan. In fact, sports. So let's just put sports there. But he's a massive rugby fan, was a rugby player himself, so understands a lot more than the rest of us. So if we rank me relative to Wesley, I'm a long way down the chain.
That's good.
But
you've been modest here.
I've been lucky to go and watch some fantastic games. We went to go watch SA Ireland in Dublin, which was just a brilliant experience, because you've got, Temple Bar and you've got the walk. We walked all the way to the stadium, beautiful stadium, and we had a lot of fun there. We managed to watch one of the cup games again, SA Ireland. So, I mean, we lost that game and then we lost the SA Ireland game in the cups in Paris.
Yeah. Did you make any money? I've never gambled, quite frankly, but I jokingly said on air, obviously in this last World Cup, we lost 3 games by 1. We won games by 1 point.
Yeah.
And so I was joking all the time, and I used to say, anybody give me a prediction by 1 point.
Yeah.
Guess what? If I'd put money on that.
That's what happened,
I've never been a gambler, so I don't put money on. So I probably could have made a lot of money if I'd got all those predictions every time I laughed and went to a betting agent.
Jeez,
that just one? I love the 1-pointers.
Yeah.
Yeah. You saw the other day France against England in the Six Nations. Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah. There's nothing like a game like that.
Yes.
And a lot of those World Cup games were just so close and ridiculous,
Yes.
It certainly adds to excitement. We're talking about the betting space.
Yes.
It has just grown.
Absolutely grown phenomenally,
You look at Betway, you look
Hollywood
at Hollywood bets,
that sort of thing, all over the attire, the clothing, and that sort of thing. One thing I don't really like, I must be honest with you, and I wish somebody could maybe explain it to me one day. I have no problem with all the branding and that sort of thing. That's what it's all about. But the branding on the field, I don't know. But when I watch a game, I see the players afterwards. They're covered in all these colours of the particular product that's been branded. Nothing to do with the betting side, but I just had to bring that up because you mentioned it, and I just find that I don't think that's not a particularly good image. Can they not find something that doesn't actually come off?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And there's a lot of, listen, in that betting world, there's obviously a lot of negative stigma. People have really wrecked themselves in that space. It does make it exciting if you put some money on a game, and it's exciting. It's obviously to that end where you're betting your life savings on these things, and so that becomes negative, But
then they always say the betting agent's social responsibility in gambling, and they do mention that at the end of their taglines and stuff like that.
And they invest into that space. So
which is a bit like alcohol as well, which they say it is dangerous for your health, kind of thing. So it's all there. The warnings are there.
And tell me, what do you think about Monster now sponsoring the team?
I mean, you've got Coca-Cola.
Yes.
You've got MTN, of course, as the main principal sponsor on the front of the jerseys, FNB on the back. Gee, it's unbelievable. It's
money
just,
there.
Whoa, big money. And you can imagine what it is like for a company. I mean, I would, this is millions. Yeah. I'd heard the other day that somebody paid a couple of million just to have their logo branded on the field, on the actual field, the markings that I was talking
Incredible,
about. Yeah. Where does it stop, actually?
Yeah.
There's just so much branding, isn't there?
The two other things I wanted to chat to you about in terms of not only branding, but money on the one side, but what do you think of our sports minister?
Gayton McKenzie.
Yes.
He's certainly somebody that I from the people that I've spoken to about him have certainly said it's what we need in the country.
It's quite authentic.
He's somebody, and I must admit, I really must commend him on his boldness, on his initiatives, and possibly wanting to shake things up a little bit. You've got to give him credit. I'm also hoping to have an interview with him, by the way. I've got his number in my phone if you want it, but
brilliant. Yeah,
I don't phone him directly.
I think it'd be brilliant.
I have respect for him as the minister, but it would be lovely to hear his insights as well. Off the field, and obviously got a story to tell, like we all have. But he certainly is. I think we're going to see a lot of things coming from Gayton. Hopefully, he can bring a Grand Prix back here to South Africa as well, because I think
that'd be interesting.
Burning desires is to bring a Grand Prix to South Africa at Kyalami or Cape Town or one of those things. Wouldn't that just be brilliant?
Yeah.
Can you imagine Lewis Hamilton over here, Charles Leclerc in their Ferraris?
Yeah. That Drive to Survive took Formula One to another level.
Didn't it just?
Documentary,
But you talk about taking things to another level. Isn't it amazing? And again, getting back to, John, just about how we see the other side of the story. For example, I was watching a documentary on David Beckham.
Yes.
And, it's amazing how you have this preconceived idea of what the person is all about.
Yes.
But wow, after watching that, it was just incredible.
Amazing.
From an empathy point of view, what he went through, how you suddenly see a different picture.
And hopefully the kind of stories you can bring to life with your podcast.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm wanting to do.
Yeah. John, it's been great having you here. Really interesting and far-reaching conversation.
I think we could go on for ages in this chat, and it's lovely. And I certainly wish you everything of the best in your business endeavors. And I always feel that you can always transfer the endeavors on a sporting field, from teamwork to scoring those tries, to achieving
Straight
those
into
goals
business,
into a business strategy for sure.
Now, to round off with the question that you've put in my mind, is there anything else that we didn't cover?
John, that's fantastic. Thank you very, very much. Nothing else I want to share, but just go out there and give it horns and make it happen at the end of the day. And don't be afraid, don't be afraid. I think where there's risk, there's reward. We see that so often. And sometimes we speak about the things that we need to learn about most.
Yeah.
So I always kind of think about all those things and just make it happen.